Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Oh, there, that's better. Welcome, welcome. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's nice to see folks in the beautiful Correct Auditorium in person. We can spread out here. You have seen the slides going by of all the amazing things that we have going on, so you know we are still in summer stride. There's still time for you to do your 20 hours of reading, coming to events like this, exploring our city, and getting your iconic SFPL tote bag. I hope you all know what I'm talking about, because if you don't, back at the back table, you can pick up your tracker, fill it out, take it to any library branch and get your free, cute as ever tote bag. We want to acknowledge that we occupy the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland, and as uninvited guests, we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples. We wish to pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community. There are some things coming up since it is Summer Stride. We've been celebrating a month of themed events. August is celebrating food. So our next two events coming up will be Miyoko's Creamery, the vegan powerhouse who's got the corner on the market on vegan cream, cheese, butter, mozzarella, everything. So she'll be here next Saturday, this Saturday, the 13th, 11 a.m. There's gonna be samples. And then the following, I wanna say Sunday, the 23rd, is a panel of Bay Area food co-ops. So I don't know if you know about all the food co-ops in the Bay Area, but we'll have Arizmendi Bakery, we'll have Other Avenues, one of my favorites. We'll have The Deep, who are from Oakland, and Community Cultivating, who are from Benicia, and they'll be talking about the past, present, and future of food co-ops in the Bay Area. One City, One Book is coming up. If you don't know what that is, we've been doing this for 17 years. It's our largest literary campaign, and our selection for this year, this round, the years have now morphed into weirdness, right? So 17th One City, One Book is This Is Ear Hustle, Unflinching Stories Behind Prison Bars. And this is Nigel Poor and Earlonne Woods will be joining us on the main stage November 3rd, moderated by Piper Kerman from Orange is the New Black. Books will be hitting all libraries, all 28 locations, and your bookmobile September. So look for that. There'll be book clubs and then 2 months of programming that align with the topic of ear hustle. All right. Without further ado, tonight's 3 amazing authors. Definitely not to miss. We're so excited to have these 3 women and their new books. Kirstin Chen is an award-winning, best-selling author of 3 novels. Her second novel, Bury What We Cannot Take, was named a Best Book of the Season by Electric Literature, The Millions, The Rumpus, Harper's Bazaar, and In Style. It was also shortlisted for Singapore's Literature Prize. Her debut novel, Soy Sauce for Beginners, was an Amazon bestseller and an Oprah Magazine editor's pick. Chen has received fellowships and awards from Steinbeck Fellow Program, Hedgebrook, and the Napa Valley Writers Conference, among others. Her writing has appeared in The Cut, Real Simple, Literary Hub, Ziziva, and more. She lives in San Francisco, teaches creative writing at University of San Francisco and Ashland University's Low Residency MFA program. Her latest book, Counterfeit, is available now. Also, all 3 books are available from our friends at the library at the back table, or you can place a hold on them through your library card. Vanessa Hua is an award-winning best-selling author and columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle. Her novel, A River of Stars, was named by the Washington Post and NPR's Best Book of 2018, and has been called a marvel by the Oprah Magazine, and delightful by The Economist. Her short story collection, Deceit and Other Possibilities, was a New York Times edition choice received an Asian Pacific American Award in Literature, and was a finalist for a California Book Award and a New American Voices Award. Her new novel, Forbidden City, is available now. Ingrid Rojas Contreras was born and raised in Bogotá, Colombia. Her first novel, Fruit of the Drunken Tree, was the silver medal winner in first fiction from the California Book Awards. And a New York Times editor choice, her essays and short stories have appeared in the New York Times, Buzzfeed, Nylon, and Guernica. Rojas Contreras has received numerous awards and fellowships from Loaf Writers Conference, VONA, Hedgebrook, the Camargo Foundation, and National Association of Latino Arts and Culture. She is a visiting writer at St. Mary's College, and her new book, The Man Who Could Move Clouds, a memoir about her grandfather, a curandero from Colombia, who was said to have the power to move clouds, is available now. And they are all available, like I said, on the back table from our friends of the San Francisco Public Library. All right, thank you all. And without further ado, Vanessa, Kirstin, and Ingrid. Welcome.
Yes, I'm Kirstin Chen. My new novel is Counterfeit. It's the story of two Asian American women who band together to grow a counterfeit handbag scheme into a global enterprise, shattering the model minority myth along the way. The main character is a straight-laced, rule-abiding lawyer named Ava Wong, who gets pulled into her old college roommate's counterfeit handbag crime ring. And for a while, they're enormously successful, but eventually that comes to an end, and Winnie mysteriously disappears, leaving Ava to pick up the pieces. So I'll just read a short excerpt, and in this excerpt, Ava has traveled to Guangzhou in southern China to complete her first assignment for Winnie. And one thing to know about Guangzhou is it is the fake handbag capital of the world. And fake handbags are sold out in the open in these giant shopping malls, just like regular merchandise. It was late morning, and the mall bustled with wholesale shoppers wheeling oversized suitcases that would soon bulge with merchandise to be fanned out across shelves in Manila and Buenos Aires and Moscow. Tucked away in the very back of the complex, 0421 was modestly decorated and badly lit and had no sign above the entrance. Winnie would later assure me that their workshop produced some of the most authentic-looking bags she'd ever come across, but they kept the good stuff hidden away whenever they were tipped off about a police raid. I told the attendant, a model thin young man with hollow cheeks, that I worked for Fang Wen-yi, and he offered me a stool and a glass of hot tea before calling to check on my order. "It's ready," he announced, and then went back to tapping on his phone. I looked around, wondering what I was supposed to do next. Pick the bags right off the shelves? Was that the Gabrielle right there in the corner? Could I pull out my phone to discreetly compare it to the picture I'd saved earlier that morning? An older man burst into the store. He was short and muscular, sporting fashionably ripped jeans and pristine white high tops. "Nice to meet you, nice to meet you. Come with me," he said, without bothering to introduce himself. I was confused. Where? Now he was confused. Where? "To get your bags." "Oh," I said, "good, let's go." He led me down a back staircase that reeked of cigarette smoke. "You're American?" he asked, scanning me from head to toe. "Yes, that's why my Chinese is so bad." He laughed. "It's decent." "So where are we going?" I asked. He pointed into the indeterminate distance, down the road. He walked briskly, dodging motorcycles, ignoring traffic lights, and I fought to keep up, raising the palm of my hand to drivers in both a gesture of apology and a plea for them to brake before they hit me. We passed another massive shopping center that specialized in the metal hardware that festooned bags and belts and shoes. I didn't dare ask my companion how these stores, all of which sold the same few items, could possibly survive side by side. That's how little I knew. It would take me a few more months to grasp the size and complexity of the counterfeit accessories trade. The man turned down a narrow street and stopped in front of a shabby-looking apartment building. "Here?" I asked. I'd expected a warehouse with security, maybe a receptionist. He shot me a sidelong look. "Yep." He pulled out a ring of keys and unlocked the front door. I followed him down a darkened hallway, listening for any signs of life beyond the walls, sniffing the air for cooking smells. The building was eerily still. If for some reason I had to scream, would anyone come to my aid? He stopped before the last door at the end, and I sized him up. He was only a couple of inches taller than me, but when he pushed open the door, his forearm flexed, displaying ropey muscles, bulging veins. He flicked on a light. A slim length of neon yellow glinted in his back pocket, a box cutter. I took a step back. "Hold on," I said, pulling out my phone and studying the blank screen. "Sorry, I have to take this call." He left the door ajar. I typed a message to Winnie. "This man, older, short, muscular, wants me to go inside his apartment to get the bags. This can't be right." I stared at the screen, willing a response to appear. Who knew who else was inside that apartment waiting for a naive American to stroll right through? I removed the money from my wallet, 2 measly 20s, and jammed them into my bra. I laced my house keys between my fingers and wondered if, when push came to shove, I'd really dare gouge out an eye. I checked my phone, no response. The man's head popped out around the side of the door, startling me. Ready? What choice did I have? I stuffed my phone in my purse and went inside. Bulging, jumbo-sized garbage bags filled the floor of the main room, which was unfurnished except for 2 plastic chairs and a plastic table with an overfilled ashtray, all pushed up against one wall. The door clicked shut, and I heard the man turn the lock. Sweat surged beneath my arms, but my mouth went dry. Behind my back, I clenched my fingers around my keys. "Want something to drink?" I stammered. "No, thanks." He picked his way to the kitchen and emerged with 2 green bottles of beer, one of which he held out to me. I shook my head, and he shrugged and deposited the spare on the plastic table. He pulled the box cutter from his pocket, extended the blade, and deftly popped off the bottle cap before taking a long swig. "I don't want to take up too much of your time," I said, speaking loudly to drown out my thrashing heartbeat. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and pointed the blade in my direction. I sucked in a breath. "You and Fang Wen-yi, how long have you been working together?" What was the right answer? I said, "Only a short while, but we've known each other for 20 years. "She's very capable," he said, but it sounded like a question. "Yes, she seems to be good at her job." He wagged the box cutter like a finger. "Yes, too good. I could not parse where this was going." "She got me in trouble with the big boss," he said. "He doesn't like the price she bargained me down to. Make sure she knows it's a one-time thing." "I'll pass on your message," I said. "I don't make decisions. I follow instructions. I'm supposed to inspect the shipment now?" He stuck the box cutter in his back pocket, took another swig of beer, and belched softly. "So where are the bags?" I asked. My keys tumbled onto the floor, and I bent to retrieve them. He narrowed his eyes. "Why so antsy? You're in a rush?" The lie gushed out of me. "Yes, actually, my family's here in Guangzhou. I'm meeting them for lunch, my husband and son." "Your husband, he's American?" I knew what he meant. "Yes." "What does he do?" "He's a surgeon." "How old is your son?" 12, I said, and then wondered why I'd bothered to lie. I pictured Ollie and my imaginary 12-year-old crashing through the door to rescue me. The man closed the distance between us, and like one giant muscle, my entire body tensed. When his hand went for his back pocket, a cry rose in my throat. He pulled out his phone. "My son's 10, he said, "almost as big as yours." He thumbed the screen and offered an image of a chubby boy spinning a basketball on one finger. I could have collapsed onto the heap of garbage bags in relief. "Very handsome," I said. "Thanks."
Sure. Thanks, Kirstin. I'm really excited to be here tonight with Ingrid and Kirstin. And we were talking about how our second and third books are coming out on the same cycle. So that'll be 2018 and now 2022. So I'll be reading from Forbidden City, which is about Chairman Mao's teenage protege and lover who becomes a poster child for the Cultural Revolution. And it's a project that was 14 years in the making, about a third of my life. So if any of you out there are writers with long projects that seem beset by dead ends and wrong turns, all I can say is keep the faith. So I'll be reading, I first got inspired to write the book when I was watching a documentary about China about a decade and a half ago, and up pops this photo of Chairman Mao dressed, surrounded by giggling teenage girls who look like Bobby Soxers. You can come have a look later if you want. But I was astonished, and it turned out that Mao was a fan of ballroom dancing. In fact, he learned from an American in 1937, Agnes Smedley, who traveled to the rebel stronghold, teaching them foxtrot and square dancing. And in the years and decades that followed, he had these cultural work troops of young women he partnered with on the ballroom and in the bedroom. And what really struck me was that, particularly in the Cultural Revolution, when a time when so many rivals were getting taken down right and left, some of these young women remained in his inner circle, were his confidants, despite so much chaos going on in the country. So I'll be reading from chapter 1, where May, my main character, all she knows is that she's been selected for a mysterious duty in the Capitol to serve the party. Forbidden City. At dawn, Ma filled our wooden tub with hot water. She hadn't bathed me in years and wouldn't have done so again until my wedding day. A few meters away, my sisters slumbered. Later, I'd wonder if they might have been pretending, their parting gift to offer me the privacy I never had there. Ma squatted behind me and poured ladles of water over my head, the scent of dust and sweat rising off in the steam. The drops trickled down my nape, my shoulders, my chest, every part of me cherished. I leaned into her hands. Her breathing became ragged, and I felt her trembling through my body until we were both shaking. "Little May," she murmured. When I tried to turn around, she gripped my shoulders. The water in the tub had gone lukewarm, and I shivered, the hairs raised on the back of my neck and arms. "Ma?" I asked. She didn't answer. She dried me in circling strokes, her hands slowed as if to delay our parting. It was the tenderness I'd always craved from her. Though she must have heard the fear in my voice, she couldn't face me. Not then, maybe not ever again. She would no longer warn me about fox fairies, shapeshifters who roam the twilight to lure travelers, of disappeared girls, runaway or raped, kidnapped or killed. She knew she had no choice but to give me up, I can now see, and didn't want me thinking about the dangers ahead. In that moment, though, I hardened against her, against my fear and my anger. She couldn't help me, and I didn't need her. The picture of the chairman on the wall seemed to nod in the flickering light. He alone would protect me on this journey. Ma helped me step into pants and a tunic that she had patched and pounded clean in the river. She braided my hair into a coil. I gave in to the gentle tugging, in to the mesmerizing firelight, hoping that I would be transformed like the braid, intricate and beautiful and strong as a model revolutionary. Shifting my eyes, I tried to hold still to keep from disturbing my mother's work. It was an hour spent on me alone for what seemed the first time in my life. Gazing into my mother's wrinkled face, I realized that she'd once been my age, leaving her family to marry a man she had never met. She didn't know she would endure beatings from her husband, endure the curse of daughters, the death of sons, and swallow suffering as often as air. If she had known, would she have left her village? That was how we survived, by not knowing what was ahead. She pressed a wooden cup into my hands, a murky brew that gave off the smell of boiled pond scum. Sipping it, I winced, my tongue curling back on itself. She pushed it towards me again, and I half gagged. "What's this?" I asked. Instead of answering, she handed me a pouch filled with tiny lumps the color of bone, their stench even more intense than what she'd brewed. The earthy scent reminded me of dongquai, the golden flowers and sturdy roots we gathered every autumn. A desperate neighbor had come asking for it after she'd given birth twice within a year. It helped keep a baby from taking hold. After I started my women's flow, Ba warned me against walking by myself at dusk, telling me to bolt from men who got too close. Why, he never said, but I understood. The curves that made me clumsy and set my running off kilter also invited the attentions of men who could ruin me. Drink this every morning, Ma now said. I finished the brew and set down the bowl. Every morning, I repeated, then swirled my tongue against my teeth to get rid of the sour, bitter taste. The party's jeep arrived with a groan and a rattle. As the hen squawked, Ba climbed out of the bed, ladled me a bowl of porridge, and dropped in thick slices of salted turnips. I ate while standing, holding the bowl close to my face. He did too. My father's fingers were the finest part of him, nimble whether mending a basket or plucking a radish. As a teenager, he left for the provincial capital to make his fortune. Although he'd wanted to work in a textile factory, he returned a year later, missing his little finger, a failure that still defined him and our family in the village. I was used to the stump, but his long fingers curved around his bowl now seemed lonely, his hand missing its smallest part. He turned away and coughed, wiping at his mouth. My family never said anything about his cough, yet another ailment among us that lingered and festered, like the sores that never quite healed, the scratch that persisted, the irritation in our eyes that went on for so long, we forgot we lived any other way. I stared at his hand, the smear of blood undeniable, yet when I looked up, he wordlessly ordered me to ignore it. I set down the bowl, unable to finish more than a few bites. Difficult as this life was, it was all I had ever known. When Ma brushed down stray hairs at the crown of my head, my resolve disappeared and the urge to cling to my parents overwhelmed me. Ba lifted my elbow to lead me to the door. Gentle, not rough, this gesture gave me the strength to leave. Thank you.
I'm so happy to be here as well, and really loved hearing you both read. So, and thank you to SFPL for hosting us today. I'm going to read from a memoir, and the memoir is about my grandfather, who was a curandero, and people said that he could move clouds. And curandero is kind of a mestizo, like medicine man. And so in his lineage, he came from a whole lineage of curanderos like him, and only the men could be initiated, except he didn't feel good about any of the sons that he'd had. He felt like all of them wouldn't be good for it. The only person that he thought could do it was my mother. And women couldn't become curanderas because it was said that something very bad would happen, that there would be some kind of tragedy that would occur. And she, what happened was that she had an accident where she fell down this empty well when she was 8 years old. And she went into a coma and she lost her memory. And then when she came back to, she started to see ghosts and to hear voices. And so the family said that she'd come into the lineage through this accident that she had. The story gets wilder. So what happened after that is that in 2007, I had an accident where I was biking and someone opened the car door into the bike lane and I crashed and I lost my memory. My family got super excited about that. And yeah, but I didn't come back with any powers to their disappointment. So I'm going to read to you from this chapter where it just goes back and forth between my mother's accident, which happened in 1964, and then my accident, which happened in 2007. Well, in the mountains of Ocaña, in the streets of Chicago, two incidents 43 years apart. In Ocaña, Colombia, in 1964, the same well behind which Nona had crouched in hiding from Nono and his machete was empty. The ledge stones had been pulled apart. All that was left was the hole that tunneled into the ground, which Mami's cousins wanted her to see. Come, Sohaila, let's go look at the hole. Mami knew the well water was gone. Nona had explained that construction workers had drilled into the mountain and were rerouting the groundwater into pipes so that the whole neighborhood could have water in their homes. Mummy was looking forward to that, to turning on a faucet and watching the water spill, but she could not get excited about some opening in the ground. "But you don't know darkness like this dark," her cousins protested. "It's really nice. You can almost lose your breath looking down." Mummy thought about it. The darkest dark she knew occurred every new moon's night in the bedroom she shared with her sister Perla, when the silhouette of their curtain and mattress could be only mutedly descried. Maybe she would like to know a darkness more absolute. The three of them, the cousins and Mummy, mounted the dusty slope to the cliff. Ledge stones lay scattered in the grass. In the middle of it all was the hole. From where Mummy stood, she could tell by the richness of the dark that the hole was deep. The cousins skipped right up to the edge, their long black hair dangling over the darkness. They yelled hello and giggled as their words stretched and distorted on their way down. There was no telling where the hole stopped being a hole. Mummy was too afraid to move any closer. One cousin offered her hand. "Come, so Haila will look together." Mummy liked this cousin. They passed whole afternoons playing tangara and hide and go seek, stealing fruit from neighbors' trees and taking naps at the haunted crest of Cristo Rey. Mummy took her cousin's hand. Together they stepped to the hollow. Mummy stared at her toes, touching that black circumference, at the light diffusing over the rows of stones that lined the well and had once shored up water. She leaned over to make sure, but she knew it was true. Never had she seen darkness like that gnashing black which whirled and howled down the distance of that hole. Mummy breathed in the damp, moth-eaten air. An updraft filled her ears, and then an eternal hush. Just before everything goes blank, the last thing Mummy remembers is a hand on the small of her back, giving her a gentle push. In Chicago, I found a dress so beautiful, the silk so rich and lush, I didn't care that Mummy made an international call to my cell phone to warn me that the dress was bewitched. Earlier that morning, I had emailed her a photo of the dress and a hastily composed message. "I present to you the new love of my life." It was a black Vera Wang, which I bought on impulse during a flash sale. I was entranced the second I laid eyes on it. I wanted to be enveloped in it, for the black to hide even my toes, for the train to leave a Stygian wake behind me. I rolled my eyes at Mummy over the phone, annoyed that she could not acknowledge the beauty of the dress, especially when I had already taken it to the seamstress for alterations and couldn't return it. "It's new. How can it be bewitched?" "You listen to me, Ingrid Carolina. That dress will turn you into a widow," I sighed. "A dress will make my husband die. I'm not even married." "Just listen. I'm telling you to stay away from that dress." "I heard you," I said, by which I did not mean I will listen to you. When the seamstress called to tell me the dress was ready to be picked up, I got on my bike and pedaled as fast as I could to make it to her shop before it closed. I never arrived. On my way there, a car door opened in front of me and I crashed. The last thought I had before denting the door, twisting in the air and cracking my head on the pavement was of Mummy, of how delusional she had to be to believe that a black dress could have such power as to undo me. Nono was hacking, so that's my mother's father. Nono was hacking into a cocota tree when a desperate need to find Mummy gripped him. He could hear a thin, ghostly version of her voice calling to him, "Papa, Papa." He dropped his machete, left it stabbing the grass, and sprinted to the house to ask each of his 6 other children if they had seen her. Nobody bore word of Mummy. Nono darted outside to the dirt road. The house of Cristo Rey were built on cement foundations 2 feet above the road, so that when rains flooded down the mountain, the houses remained intact. Nona's family all lived next to one another, uncles and second cousins all around. Nono peered down the road. It was possible Mummy had gone further down the mountain to have breakfast at a stranger's. Mami was always behaving like a stray cat. When Nona sent her out to sell pineapples, Mami enchanted whoever crossed her path with stories, and after a while, when it seemed natural, she let them know her favorite food was fish and that she would come eat it if invited. Nono hopped down onto the dirt road and made his way to Mama Diaz. He spotted Mami's two cousins sitting next door, dangling their feet over the road, staring off into space, quiet. He bounded to their side. Have you seen Sohaila? They looked at each other. Sohaila? They said the name as if trying it on their tongues for the first time. I have not seen Sohaila. Have you? No, I have not seen Sohaila. You either? No, not today. Not today. No. I'll stop there. Thank you. I'm so fascinated by what it was like to write a second and go from the imagination of my first novel and then finding another story. And I wondered for you all, like, what was either like the moment of genesis for this second book, or what it was like to switch from one idea to another.
Well, I think it's been said, how do you know you're done with a book? When you're so sick of it, you can't look at it any longer, or you fall in love with another book. So I think my experience is a little bit different in that Forbidden City is the first book I ever drafted, but the third one I published. So it's a long and winding story, but just briefly, I wrote it in grad school. It came close to selling in 2009. Didn't realize that the recession would have any impact on the publishing industry. And in fact, it did. So it came close to selling, but didn't. And I was heartbroken, breaking out in hives, just worrying as they kept, that my agent at the time was trying to sell it to smaller and smaller publishing houses. But all I could do was continue writing. And for me, that meant continue to work on my short story collection and to begin what would become A River of Stars, the first novel that I ended up publishing in 2018. That book is a pregnant Chinese Thelma and Louise, and much of it is set in San Francisco's Chinatown, where the two pregnant women hide out. But yeah, I mean, I think I remember talking to a book editor who said, oh, everyone has a first novel shoved in their desk. And I thought, okay, well, that might be true. It's still very painful. But yeah, I think I was able to start on the next project and even say on the project I'm working on now, because although this book just came out in May, and I want the best for it as it enters the world, I'm now caught up in the world of the next book that I'm working on.
So you're committed to like the four-year cycle.
We'll see.
What about you?
What you just said, Vanessa, about how a book is done when you're too sick of it to even look at it, really resonates with me. And I think because of that, I've seen through the years, this is my third novel, that each book is a very, very clear reaction to the book that came before. So to give you an example, my first novel, Soy Sauce for Beginners, is set in contemporary Singapore. It's centered on a family business that's an artisanal soy sauce factory. And it has a protagonist that on the surface looks very much like me. And so I would go on book tour, and the first question that I would get is, does your family own a soy sauce factory? And if so, what is the soy sauce called? Because I Googled it and couldn't find it. And I was so kind of irked by having to answer that question and say, no, it's fiction, that for my next book, I wrote historical fiction set in 1950s Southern China. And I was like, nobody will ask me if this character is me, because I wasn't born in 1950s. And so that was my kind of reaction to that, even though it was subconscious. And so when it came to this book, now I can see very clearly that when I was working on my last book, Bury What We Cannot Take, it was a book that required an incredible amount of research. And that was kind of the largest challenge that I had to overcome in order to write that book. And I remember that one day after a really hard day of research, I turned to my partner and I said, listen, the next book that I write is going to require zero research and it's going to have to be about the only topic that I know about, and that is designer handbags. And so I said that as a joke, but eventually, I can't, because of various circumstances, it grew into this kind of crime caper involving the counterfeit handbag industry, which in the end required a lot of research. But my kind of avenue in was really this desire to feel expert for once in something that I was writing. How about you?
I love that idea of books being a reaction to what you're experiencing. I feel like mine, so I wrote an autobiographical novel first, and it was the story of an immigrant family who ends up as a refugee family in the US, and they're fleeing the violence of the 90s in Colombia. I did a lot of research for that one, and I think I went the other way, where I wanted to I think what was exciting for me was to switch genres completely and to do nonfiction. But I guess I've always really loved the research element of it. And for this book, it was really fun. So that felt like a change, because for the novel, I was just reading a lot of newspapers and reading a lot about car bombs and violence and guerrilla groups at the time. And then for this one, I was just interviewing people about things that are not easily defined, or, you can't quite comfortably talk about them, like seeing ghosts, having conversations with people about what it is that they thought they'd seen and what it is that they thought they'd experienced. And getting kind of like multiple accounts on strange occurrences like that. So it did feel very different. But yeah, I do feel like it's kind of very reactionary, the way that I'm kind of going through.
Well, and it just made me think about how all three of our books are about topics that maybe fall outside of any official record. And so did you feel a particular urgency in telling your family story, like things that wouldn't necessarily be in a textbook, or that had to be found through oral history of, say, elders who knows how much time is left to get those stories?
Yeah, I was completely thinking about that. I think with my novel too, I was concerned with the part of the political story that we get, or like the part that is reported in the news, and how the reality of falling in with the guerrillas, that it would be a very complicated situation. And one character in my novel is kind of threatened into collaborating with the guerrillas. So I felt like that was kind of an underreported story. And then for this one, I did feel like if I've seen any story like this, I've seen it in fiction, and I hadn't seen it in nonfiction. So for me, because it's my family, and it's these are the stories of my family, and like where we come from, and what we the stories that we tell about ourselves, that it became so important for me to put that into the record. Yeah. Did you feel that way?
Well, definitely with my character May, I felt she was emblematic of the millions of young women who have a hand in shaping history, but don't ever make it into the official record, don't even end up as a footnote, whether that's in China in the 1960s or in the United States in 2020. So I think as a journalist and as a fiction writer, I've always been interested in shining a light onto untold stories. And I think, my three books, some are contemporary, historical, but that's sort of one of the guiding forces behind it, I think. How about you, Kirstin?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I set out. It's interesting that you described all our books as being kind of apart from the official record. I don't know that I set out to do that. But when I have, we've all been kind of touring for our books, and I have gotten a lot of reader responses where people say like, oh, it's so refreshing to read a story with two immigrant characters behaving badly. And you said that about your previous book, River of Stars. It's an Asian Thelma and Louise. And I didn't set out to kind of break a stereotype, although I was interested in subverting the model minority myth. And so yes, in that way, yes. But it did strike me how rare that is. I remember, this book was picked for the Reese Witherspoon Book Club, which was an incredible honor. But part of the vetting process for that, it's kind of inside baseball, part of the vetting process is that they do a mock book club to kind of see what kind of, how the book would do in a book club setting.
Who's in the book club?
The staff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They do like a mock book club to see how a book, I don't know too much about the process, but they do that to see what kind of questions will come up and, what are the discussion points. And one of the things was, is it okay that this is a book that in some ways celebrates or, is at least centered on two women behaving badly? And then their ultimate conclusion was, but shouldn't characters of color be allowed to behave badly just like any other characters of color, and just like any other characters rather. And so that was something that I've been thinking of just by seeing the reader reception of this book.
How long did this one take you to writing it?
This one took me 4 years, which is actually very fast for me, which sounds kind of odd, but as you all know, books take as long as they take, and often for me 5+ years. And I think part of it was because I started it in 2017, right after the election, which I think we all have talked about how that was an incredibly hard period for many reasons, but creatively, I think a lot of us didn't write for most of that year. And so I think when this idea finally came to me, and it is, very much a book that is set post-election, it is also happens right after the election of 2016. I think when the idea finally came to me, there was like a combination of like rage and relief that sort of fueled the writing. How about both of you?
Well, I heard you say it took how many years?
14
years. Yeah.
14 long years.
Yeah. I think with this book, the story was so complicated and it just involved so many different storylines that one of the things that I really felt that I needed before I could go on was getting the first chapter right. So I wrote the first chapter over and over again for 7 years. So I have like this folder in my computer that's just first chapter tries, and there's maybe like, I don't even know.
How did you know when it was right?
It felt like it was doing all of the things that I wanted to, and it felt like I wasn't kind of giving anything away that I didn't want to. Like politically, I mean. And then the rest of it I wrote. So I came upon the right chapter, or the right version of it
In this universe.
while I was on tour for my novel. So this was in probably 2019 at that point. And then I wrote the rest of it during pandemic. So I also wrote this one very quickly.
Yeah, I remember being blown away by an early version. I think I heard you read in 2013 or for the Phelan Awards. Do you remember what year that was? Or
Yeah. For that I wrote my part of the amnesia accident. So I wrote that, and I didn't think that was part of the memoir back then. So really like me understanding what the story was. It was like a really long journey into that.
Well, I mean, I think that's why it's so exciting. We're so lucky to live in San Francisco and the Bay Area, all these wonderful readings of things that aren't yet books, but someday might. And it's just like an opportunity to be able to.
I remember when you read from this book in 2009.
Yes, at Loaf.
Yes, I mean, and here we are. I am so curious though, because both of you write fiction and nonfiction, and I don't at all. I only write fiction. If you can talk about like working in two genres, like how a story is going to be fiction versus nonfiction. What are the joys and the challenges of that?
I would love to hear your answer first.
Well, it's interesting because one of the next projects I'm contemplating is an essay collection. So although I regularly write for the Chronicle every week and a column, it's been interesting kind of writing in a longer form, and also trying to think about what the overall organizing principle will be. I think it's going to involve time and foraging, which is a pandemic habit or way of life that I picked up, passion that I picked up.
Where do you forage?
Oh, anywhere. In my neighborhood, I mean, I think just there's wild plums, wild mint, blackberries, miner's lettuce. Yeah, and it's always
You're
exciting.
gonna be my apocalypse buddy.
Okay. Oh, I already know, Ingrid, you seem like someone with great knife skills, axe skills.
Yes.
and-
Yeah, I can contribute that to the group.
But just in terms of your question, I guess with fiction, I'm always interested in exploring where that official record ends, and so maybe with nonfiction or with essays, I'm exploring things that can be sort of known or stated, or at least I'm willing to pull back the veil to say, like, this is nonfiction. Whereas fiction, I feel like I have the freedom to I don't know, to go wherever my imagination goes and still have that cover. How about you?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I ask myself is this story going to be more interesting as fiction or as nonfiction? With the memoir, it was just clear, if I can interview people about seeing ghosts, to me, that's just so, it's it should be memoir. To me, that's so exciting. And I think if I told it as fiction, adapted it that way, that it would almost seem like it belongs in fiction, so it just becomes less exciting to me.
Yeah.
And I do agree, though, Vanessa, with this part about the willingness to pull back the veil, because I think nonfiction memoir requires so much of the author, because you have to, it's truth making, it's you're telling everybody's truths, and you have to be willing to do that. And so some stories are like, I'm not willing to do that publicly, but I can do it through the veil of fiction, and I can kind of do a very similar truth telling, or even be more truthful in fiction because I have that veil.
Did you ever, you mentioned your first novel was autobiographical. Did you ever consider that in memoir form, or was it
I
always?
did. I think one of the first things that I did was trying to write it as an essay. I thought that it could be an essay. And I wrote one paragraph and was terrified, and I was like, I can't write this.
Oh, that's a good way to tell too.
Yeah.
If the fear is overwhelming.
Or actually, I think terror in general about whether you should embark on a project is motivating force, not to necessarily run away from, but that, like, you have very strong feelings about something that have to come out in whatever genre you suppose. I think we have time for a few questions, if anyone, or if there's any online. Hello out there.
Oh, there's a question.
So this is a question for Kirstin Chen. This is a question for Kirstin Chen. You get one bag. ISL, Gucci, LV,
You'd be
Chanel.
surprised. I've been asked this question before. Yes. What would be my bag recommendation? Well, I'll preface that with just a little, now that I've been on tour, I get asked a lot of questions about handbags, which I'm happy to answer because I consider myself an armchair expert on handbags, like I said. But one thing that has been interesting, having to talk about it a lot, is that I feel like prior to writing a book about handbags, my love of handbags was very pure and unequivocal. I was just like a fashion lover, and I never had to talk about it because writers really don't care. Like, nobody ever asked me what my bag was. And now that I have to talk about it for the first time, I am like actively interrogating why it is I love handbags. And so maybe I will write an essay about this someday, but it's now quite fraught. I remember doing a podcast right before my book came out, and the podcast host said very sweetly, she wasn't trying to like stump me. She was like, so tell me, why is a handbag, why does this cost so much? And I was like, no reason. Like, it's not really better quality. It's not no reason besides the tag that is on it. And, so that was a long answer, but I would say, if I had to pick a brand that I really love, a kind of under the radar brand, Loaf is a brand I really like. I still think it's good quality for the amount of money that you have to spend. And it's not like super logoed.
Where is it from?
Made in Spain.
Okay.
Thank you all. That was great. I have a question for Vanessa. Could you talk more about your research process? How did you kind of get the information that you needed to write your book?
Oh, sure. So I guess first off, a huge thanks to libraries everywhere, especially I love interlibrary loan. It feels like you have access to every book anywhere. So I remember that I was still living in Southern California at the time, and I was putting in so many requests. When I went to do the pickup, the librarian said, "Oh, you're Vanessa Hua," because I was just hauling in stacks of whatever books I could find, whether and so I read all the historical accounts that were available. But it's funny, it'd be a meeting, it'd be about a tense meeting of officials, but I'd be most interested in like, oh, what kind of couch were they sitting on? So I combed what was available and took what was most useful. I also traveled to China. I got a fellowship in grad school and was able to go to villages west of Beijing and talk to grannies about their time during the Cultural Revolution. And just, and because this project took such a long period of time, more information became available later. And some of that information in some ways substantiated what I'd already guessed at in my imagination. For example, there wasn't anything in English written by any of Mao's former young lovers, but then I found some translated interview maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and the dynamics they described in the dance troupe were as I had, written, right? Or even there's a moment where she's standing on shore in Hong Kong on these mudflats and looking back on China, and I wrote the scene before I ever got there. And when I got there, it almost felt as if I'd somehow willed it into being, which of course I hadn't. But it kind of just speaks to the power of imagination. And then with the training I had as a journalist and doing the interviews or tracking down research or following the footnotes, I think helped me write the book. But just one last thing though, it is always important with historical work, not to get too much into the weeds, because in some ways those accounts have already been written. And I've read them, and you don't necessarily want to read that in a novel. So for me, the focus was figuring out, using it as the floor and not the ceiling to my imagination. So, yeah. Thank you.
Did you find, Ingrid, that you used research differently for your novel versus your memoir? Now I'm curious.
I think I did, because the research for the novel was so political. And for this book, I found that the research that I wanted, I couldn't find, actually. So I couldn't find it in books. So I had to do a lot of oral interviews and just going to places, walking around, talking to people type of work. And just asking weird questions, which is great.
What did you have for breakfast?
Yeah.
We do have a question from the online audience, and that is for Ingrid. Will the book be in Spanish, and do you write in Spanish? Also, it's a three-parter. How does your family feel about the book?
Okay. The book will be in Spanish. It comes out in Spanish in September. And we're having an event with SFPL and Medicine for Nightmares bookstore. And I write in English. I've written in English ever since my family migrated from Colombia. And one of the things that happened in that time was that for me, just the experience of losing everything and just having to move and leaving everything behind kind of required a new language for me. And it was a very interesting time because I had very rudimentary understanding of English. So I didn't keep any of what I wrote then, but I'm very curious about what it would have even sounded like. And And I think over time, as I just continued to move around in South America with my family and then eventually made my way to the US, that English became the language of migration for me. And so now, because I've thought of it that way, then it feels wrong for me to write in Spanish directly. Yeah, like it doesn't feel, it feels like I'm skipping part of my own trajectory or part of my own history. And the last part, so my family hasn't read yet, but I've gone through and told my mother, just kind of done an oral telling for her of what's in the book, and she loved that. She's very happy that she's on the cover.
Oh, you took photos for the book, right? Your own photos are in the book.
Yeah, I took, there's photos in the book. I traveled with a Polaroid camera, and there's some old family photos that are in there as well.
I love that. And so yes, as Ingrid mentioned, September 9th, Medicine for Nightmares in Spanish. Ingrid will be there. And they're also having a book club, so check out Medicine for Nightmares. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
And there
you.
are books available in the back. If you want your book signed, I'm sure they will do that for you. And thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.